They seated me at table 12, behind a floral arrangement the size of a small aircraft, white hibiscus, baby's breath, and enough roses to supply every funeral home in the state of Connecticut. I couldn't see the altar. I couldn't see my daughter. I had to lean sideways and catch her reflection in the ballroom mirror across the room, a shimmering ghost of white lace floating down an aisle I was apparently too insignificant to witness directly. I'm Joanna Redford. I'm 72 years old, and on the day my only daughter got married, I smiled sweetly, adjusted my mother's pearl earrings, and decided that this charming boy she'd married had absolutely no idea what he'd just walked into. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. The morning had started with such optimism. I'd chosen my outfit with the precision of a chess grandmaster, a modest gray dress that whispered harmless widow, paired with my mother's pearl earrings, the ones she wore to her own wedding in 1952. My hair was done at Rosie's salon on Main Street. Nothing too fancy, just respectable enough for the mother of the bride, just invisible enough to avoid making anyone uncomfortable. When I arrived at the venue, a converted estate in Greenwich that probably charged more for the napkins than I'd spent on my first car, Tamsin met me at the side entrance, not the front, the side. "Mom, you look acceptable," she said, already distracted by whatever crisis the wedding coordinator was having with the ice sculpture. Acceptable. Like a participation trophy in human form, like a piece of furniture that met the minimum standard for not embarrassing anyone. I filed the word away in the place where I keep things that hurt too much to examine in the moment. I'd take it out later, at home, when no one was watching. That's what 72 years teaches you. Not how to stop feeling pain, but how to schedule it for a more convenient time. Tamsin looked radiant. I'll give her that. She was wearing my grandmother's lace veil, the one beautiful thing our family had managed to keep through 2 generations of modest living, through Henry's years of, "We don't need anything fancy, Joe," and my years of believing him. The lace caught the October light and turned my daughter into something from a painting, all golden and glowing with that new bride energy that makes everyone temporarily forget their own sadness. She was 32, confident, accomplished in that vague way people describe women who work in marketing and own nice handbags. And she was about to marry Cole Anders, a man I'd met exactly 4 times before he proposed to my daughter. 4 times. I could count them the way you count warning signs after an accident. As the guests filtered into the ballroom, the social architecture became brutally clear. There were the Anders guests, sleek, expensive, smelling of money and confidence. And there were the Redford guests, a modest collection of Henry's old colleagues, my bridge club friends, and my neighbor Martha, who'd brought her own tissues because she cried at everything. Cole's parents swept in like visiting dignitaries from a country where everyone was attractive and slightly condescending. His father, Nate Anders, was the kind of man who shook your hand while looking over your shoulder for someone more important. Tall, silver-haired, with a jaw that suggested generations of good breeding and better dentists. And then there was Dorothy Anders. Dorothy entered the ballroom the way a warship enters a harbor, slowly, deliberately, expecting everything in her path to move. She was draped in enough diamonds to blind passing aircraft, her blonde hair sculpted into something architectural, her smile calibrated to communicate warmth to exactly the people who mattered and absolute zero to everyone else. She worked the room with surgical precision, air-kissing the wife of a hedge fund manager, squeezing the arm of a state senator, laughing, that specific rich woman laugh that sounds like crystal touching crystal, at something a man in a $4,000 suit whispered in her ear. And when her trajectory brought her within 6 feet of me, she looked straight through my body as if I were made of glass. Not rude exactly. Worse than rude. I simply didn't register on whatever frequency her eyes operated on. I'd spent 47 years married to a man who saw me every single day. Being invisible was a new sensation, and I was still learning how much it could sting. "Excuse me," I told the frazzled usher, a college-aged boy drowning in a borrowed suit. I showed him my table card. "I believe there might be a delightful mistake here." He checked his list. "Table 12, ma'am, right behind the decorative feature." Decorative feature. How diplomatically they'd framed my exile. I was being stored behind enough flowers to supply a botanical garden, positioned at the maximum possible distance from the head table while still technically being in the same room. I navigated to my designated exile and sat down. From my horticultural prison, I had a spectacular view of absolutely nothing except petals and pistils. But the mirror, that enormous gilded mirror on the far wall, gave me something better than a front row seat. It gave me the ability to watch everyone without anyone watching me. There is a particular kind of freedom in being invisible. People stop performing when they think no one important is looking. And what I saw in that mirror over the next 3 hours was an education more valuable than any degree. I saw Nate Anders check his phone 11 times during the ceremony. I saw Dorothy rearrange the place cards at table 1 so that a woman she apparently disliked was moved further from the center. I saw Tamsin glance toward table 12 exactly once, confirm I was seated and quiet, and turn away with what looked like relief. And I saw Cole. Oh, I saw Cole Anders very clearly from my invisible little corner of the world. He was handsome. I'll grant him that. 34 years old, dark hair, the kind of jaw that makes women in grocery stores drop things. He wore his expensive suit the way some men wear armor, like it was designed to make you trust him before he'd said a single word. And his smile, God, that smile. It could power a small city. But here's what 72 years of watching people teaches you. Everyone has one smile, maybe 2 if they're particularly complex. Cole Anders had 4. I cataloged them from my floral bunker with the detached precision of a woman who'd spent nearly 5 decades reading her husband's silences. Smile number 1, full beam, all teeth, crinkled eyes, deployed exclusively for the obviously wealthy guests, the ones whose watches cost more than cars. Smile number 2, warm but measured, with a slight head tilt, reserved for the useful people, the ones who might offer connections or opportunities. Smile number 3, polite, brief, already looking past you, for the ordinary guests, the ones who had nothing to offer. And smile number 4, the one I got, when he finally made his way to table 12 during cocktail hour. This smile was different from the others. It was softer, more careful. The kind of smile you give to someone you're evaluating, someone you're trying to figure out how to use. Mrs. Redford. He practically levitated into the empty chair beside me, smelling of expensive cologne and ambition. Isn't this just magical? He gestured at the reception like he'd personally arranged the sunset streaming through the windows. You must be absolutely bursting with pride, he said. Oh, I'm practically vibrating with maternal joy, I replied, my voice sweeter than artificial sweetener. Though I must say the view from back here is quite educational. He either missed the acid in my tone or chose to ignore it. Politicians and predators share that particular skill. I was hoping we could spend some quality time together soon, he said, leaning forward like he was sharing a secret. Really get to know each other properly. How refreshing. Most people usually manage that before marrying into the family. But I do admire your commitment to doing things in reverse chronological order. That earned me a microscopic pause in his smile, barely a flicker, like a candle in a draft, but I caught it the way a hawk catches movement in tall grass. I was thinking dinner this week, he continued, recovering smoothly. Just the 2 of us. I have some ideas about family collaboration. Family collaboration. The phrase landed in my ear like a spider. Small, seemingly harmless, but unmistakably alive with intention. How deliciously mysterious. Thursday work for you? Perfect. I know a place downtown, very private. Good for meaningful conversations. Meaningful conversations about what? My thrilling stamp collection? My weekly bridge club scandals? The devastating emptiness of a house where every room still smelled like a man who'd been dead for 2 years? I can hardly contain my excitement, I said, fanning myself with my linen napkin like a southern belle having the vapors. As Cole glided away to charm more promising prospects, I caught my reflection in that ballroom mirror. A silver-haired woman in an understated dress, sitting alone behind a wall of flowers, holding a napkin like a tiny white flag of surrender. Someone who looked like she probably clipped coupons and worried about heating bills. Someone who checked the price of eggs at 2 different grocery stores. Someone whose most exciting weekly event was arguing about bridge hands with Martha and the Hendersons. Exactly the image I'd been wearing for 2 years. Not because I wanted to, because Henry had left me, and grief has a way of making you small. You shrink into yourself like a turtle pulling into its shell, and after enough time passes, everyone, including your own daughter, starts to think the shell is all there is. During the father-daughter dance, which wasn't a father-daughter dance at all, because Henry was in the ground at Evergreen Cemetery, so Nate Anders had volunteered to stand in with the casual confidence of a man accustomed to filling spaces he hadn't been invited into. I slipped away to the marble restroom. In that pristine sanctuary, I touched up my lipstick and practiced my harmless elderly widow expression in the mirror. Slightly confused, slightly grateful, completely non-threatening. It was a face I'd perfected over 24 months of grocery store clerks speaking slowly to me, of bank tellers asking if I had someone to help with my accounts, of my own daughter introducing me to people as my mother. She lives alone now. When I returned to my floral fortress, Cole was charming the elderly couple at the next table, Walt and Peggy Henderson from Henry's old accounting firm. They were eating up his attention like it was wedding cake. Walt was showing Cole pictures of his grandchildren on his phone, and Cole was making all the right noises, nodding in all the right places, his smile set to number 2, warm but measured. "Mrs. Redford," Cole said, catching my eye as I sat down. "Really looking forward to Thursday." "So am I, dear. So am I." As the band played and guests danced and the evening slowly wound itself down like a music box running out of spring, I watched my new son-in-law work the room. He moved through clusters of guests with the efficiency of a man who'd done this many times before. Not the socializing, but the assessing. Every handshake was a measurement. Every conversation was reconnaissance. I recognized the behavior because I'd seen it before. Not in Henry. Henry had been the opposite of calculated. A man who wore his kindness like an old sweater, comfortable and unself-conscious. No, I'd seen it in the financial advisors who'd circled me after Henry's funeral, the ones who showed up with condolence cards and retirement planning brochures in the same hand. Men who smelled vulnerability the way sharks smell blood, from a great distance, with professional interest. Cole was one of those men. I was certain of it in the way you're certain of weather. Not because someone told you, but because you felt it in your bones. The question wasn't whether Cole Anders was dangerous. The question was what exactly he was hunting. That night, after the last dance and the bouquet toss, Tamsin threw it directly toward a cluster of Cole's friends, bypassing my side of the room entirely. I drove home alone. The house on Birch Lane was dark except for the porch light I always left on. Henry's habit. I'd never been able to break it. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. Henry's reading glasses on the side table by his chair. His crossword puzzle book, still open to the last puzzle he'd finished. 47 across. Protective barrier. The answer was shield, written in his cramped, familiar handwriting. His coffee mug in the dish rack, which I washed every week even though no one had used it in 2 years, because putting it away would mean admitting he was really gone. I sat in my kitchen and poured a glass of the cheap wine I kept in the refrigerator. Not Henry's wine. He'd had expensive taste in the few things he allowed himself. But my wine. The widow's wine. The wine you buy when no one's watching and no one cares what you drink. And I thought about Cole Anders and his 4 smiles and his meaningful conversations and his family collaboration. I thought about table 12 and the word acceptable and the way my daughter had checked on me exactly once, the way you check on luggage you've stored in an overhead bin, not out of love, but to confirm it hasn't shifted during turbulence. I thought about being 72 years old in a world that had decided I was furniture. And then I thought about something Henry used to say, back when he was alive and the world still had color in it. He'd say it when he caught me underestimating myself, when I'd defer to someone younger or louder or more confident. "Joanna Redford, you are the most dangerous person in any room you walk into, and the most dangerous thing about you is that nobody knows it, including you." I'd always laughed when he said that. Sweet, impractical Henry, married to a woman who ironed his shirts and organized the spice rack alphabetically, and had never done a single dangerous thing in her entire modest life. But sitting in my dark kitchen, 5 days into being the mother-in-law of a man who was clearly planning something, I felt a strange sensation, like a pilot light that had been off for 2 years suddenly clicking back on. Not anger exactly, not yet. Something quieter and more patient than anger. Attention. For the first time since Henry died, I was paying attention to the world instead of hiding from it. And the world, I was starting to realize, had sent me something very interesting to pay attention to. Cole Anders thought he was circling a helpless widow. He had no idea the widow was circling him right back. The post-wedding silence lasted exactly 5 days before the machinery started turning. Tamsin called daily. Short, breathless dispatches from the front lines of marital bliss. Cole's so thoughtful, Mom. He's already talking about our financial future. He wants to make sure everyone in the family is taken care of. Everyone in the family. The phrase had a specific weight to it, like a stone dropped into still water. How lovely, sweetheart. A husband who thinks about money constantly, especially other people's money. How romantic. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, dear. Just that financial planning makes my heart flutter. Tell me more about the honeymoon. Tamsin missed the sarcasm entirely, or chose to. Over 32 years, I'd never been able to tell the difference with my daughter, and that uncertainty was its own kind of wound. Thursday arrived with all the enthusiasm of a dental procedure you couldn't reschedule. I dressed for my role with the care of an actress preparing for opening night. Simple black dress that suggested respectability without prosperity. My mother's pearl earrings, real, but modest enough to read as sentimental rather than valuable. And Henry's watch, the old Timex with the cracked face that still looked dignified from a distance. The watch was broken. It had stopped at 3:47, the exact minute Henry's heart had stopped in the kitchen 2 years ago, the paramedics told me later. I wore it every day. People assumed it was nostalgia. It was actually armor. The restaurant Cole had chosen was one of those places in downtown Greenwich where they pronounced water with a French accent, and the waiters looked at you like you were personally responsible for their artistic disappointment. Everything was white marble and soft lighting and the kind of quiet that cost $200 a plate to maintain. He was already seated when I arrived, looking every inch the successful young professional. Navy blazer, open collar, a watch that probably cost more than my car. He stood when he saw me. Good manners, or the performance of good manners, which amounts to the same thing when you're not paying close attention. Joanna. He used my first name now. Not Mrs. Redford. Joanna. Like we were friends. Like he'd earned the intimacy. You look absolutely wonderful tonight. Thank you, dear. And this place is certainly something. It was something, all right. The kind of something that made you acutely aware of every year you'd spent buying store-brand cereal and reusing aluminum foil. We ordered wine. He insisted on a bottle with more syllables than my high school diploma, and settled into what he clearly believed would be a simple conversation with a simple woman. So, he began, swirling his Bordeaux like a sommelier with delusions of grandeur. How are you really managing, Joanna? On your own? Oh, brilliantly. 72 years of practice makes most things manageable. Of course, but surely it gets overwhelming sometimes. That big house, all those decisions, bills, maintenance, taxes. It's a lot for anyone, let alone someone who's recently lost their... He trailed off with practiced delicacy. Their partner, their support system, their reason for getting out of bed. Henry always said I had enough opinions for 3 people, I replied. So I keep myself thoroughly entertained. He laughed. That boardroom laugh. The one designed to make the other person feel clever while revealing nothing about the laugher. I'd heard it from financial advisors, insurance salesmen, and now from my son-in-law. It was the laugh of a man who was waiting for his turn to speak. That's wonderful. But honestly, Joanna, don't you ever worry about the practical side? Finances, legal issues, people who might... He paused, choosing his words with the care of a man defusing a bomb. People who might take advantage of your generous nature? And there it was. The real topic, arriving right on schedule between the appetizer and the entree, dressed in concern and served with $90 wine. Take advantage? I repeated, tilting my head the way elderly women do when they want you to think they're slightly confused. Should I be worried about something specific, Cole? Not worried exactly, but prepared. You know how complicated things become for someone in your situation. My situation? Living alone, making major financial decisions without guidance, being potentially vulnerable to people who might not have your best interests at heart. Vulnerable. The word sat between us like a chess piece he'd just moved into position. How thoughtful of you to worry about my vulnerability, I said. I had no idea I was so fragile. He reached into his jacket pocket with the smooth confidence of a magician who'd performed this trick 100 times. Out came a manila folder, not too thick, not too thin, the Goldilocks of legal intimidation, which he placed on the white tablecloth like an offering. I've been consulting with an attorney who specializes in elder care, he said. Someone who handles situations like yours every day. Situations like mine. I was apparently a category now, a demographic, a target market. Just some basic paperwork, he continued. Safeguards, in case you ever need help making important decisions. I opened the folder with the measured calm of someone handling a snake they suspected was venomous but hadn't yet confirmed. Page 1. Durable power of attorney, granting Cole Anders and Tamsin Anders full authority over my financial decisions. Page 2. Healthcare power of attorney, granting Cole Anders and Tamsin Anders the right to make medical decisions on my behalf. Page 3. Financial oversight agreement, giving Cole Anders direct access to all my bank accounts, investments, and property. Page 4. Residential care authorization, allowing Cole Anders to make decisions about my living arrangements if he determined I could no longer care for myself. Living arrangements. The phrase was a silk glove wrapped around an iron fist. What it meant, translated from legal euphemism into plain English, was we can put you in a nursing home whenever we decide you've become inconvenient. This is quite comprehensive, I said mildly. Your attorney was very thorough. He handles many cases like yours. Families just want peace of mind. And Tamsin is aware of this thoughtful initiative? She thinks it's a wonderful idea. We both just want to make sure you're protected, Joanna. Protected. There was that word again. In my experience, when someone tells you 3 times in one dinner that they want to protect you, what they really want is to protect themselves from the inconvenience of your independence. I closed the folder, placed both hands on top of it, looked directly into Cole Anders' perfectly symmetrical face. I'll need time to review this with my own attorney. Something shifted behind his eyes. A flicker, not of anger, but of recalculation. Like a chess player who'd expected a 3-move checkmate and suddenly realized the board was more complicated than he'd assumed. Your own attorney? Oh, I know it seems silly, but I'd feel more comfortable having someone explain all these big legal words in terms my simple mind can grasp. Joanna, I really think we should handle this tonight. These things work best when they're done efficiently. My attorney emphasized that delays could create complications. Complications, meaning time for me to think, time for me to consult someone, time for me to realize what I was being asked to sign away. I'm sure your notary will understand, I said. The mask slipped, just for a heartbeat, but I saw what was underneath, and it confirmed everything. How did you know about the notary? Lucky guess. You strike me as someone who plans ahead. Cole stared at me across the white tablecloth, across the expensive wine, across the manila folder that was supposed to be the instrument of my surrender. I could almost hear the gears turning behind those handsome eyes. Was this old woman genuinely naive? Or was she something else entirely? Of course, he said finally, recovering his smile like a man picking up a dropped coin. Take all the time you need. But his eyes said something different. His eyes said, I'll be back, and next time I won't give you room to hesitate. I drove home through the dark Connecticut streets with the folder on my passenger seat like an uninvited guest. When I pulled into the driveway on Birch Lane, the porch light was on. Henry's light, my constant, and the house was exactly as empty as I'd left it. I sat in my kitchen, Henry's chair across from me, holding nothing but shadow and memory. The crossword book, the reading glasses, the coffee mug I couldn't put away. And for the first time in 2 years, the emptiness didn't make me sad. It made me furious. Not at Cole. I'd expected Cole. Men like Cole had been circling widows since the invention of inheritance. He was a predator doing what predators do. You don't get angry at a wolf for hunting. You get angry at yourself for standing in the open field pretending wolves don't exist. Number 1, I was furious at something deeper. At the fact that my daughter, my Tamsin, who I'd carried for 9 months and nursed through chickenpox and driven to college with a car full of boxes and tears, had looked at those papers and said, wonderful idea. At the fact that somewhere in the past 2 years, my child had decided that her mother was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. And beneath even that fury, something worse. The quiet, devastating suspicion that maybe Tamsin wasn't entirely wrong. Maybe I had become small. Maybe grief had shrunk me so completely that even my own daughter couldn't see me anymore. Maybe table 12 was exactly where I belonged. I sat with that thought for a long time, long enough for the kitchen to go fully dark, long enough for the ice in my water glass to melt, long enough for the fury to settle into something colder and more useful. Then I looked at Henry's chair and said out loud, to a dead man who couldn't hear me. "All right, Henry, he's here. Whatever you left me, I'm ready." The next morning, I stood at the top of my basement stairs, holding a key I'd found 2 years ago in Henry's nightstand drawer and never used. It was a small key. Brass, unremarkable, the kind that could belong to a filing cabinet or a lockbox or any of the ordinary containers that hold ordinary things. Henry had kept it in a small envelope with my name written on the front in his cramped, careful handwriting. Just Joanna. No explanation, no instructions, just my name, like that was enough. For 2 years it had been enough to keep me away, not because I didn't want to know what the key opened, because I was afraid that whatever Henry had locked away would be the last new thing I'd ever learn about him. And as long as the key stayed in the drawer, there was still one more conversation to have with my husband, one more secret to share, one more reason to believe he wasn't entirely gone. But Cole Anders and his manila folder had changed the math. Whatever Henry had hidden down there, I needed it now more than I needed the comfort of not knowing. The basement smelled like old paper and Old Spice, Henry's cologne, still clinging to the cardigan he'd left draped over his desk chair 2 years ago. I hadn't moved it, hadn't washed it. Sometimes, on very bad nights, I came down here just to stand near it and breathe. His desk sat exactly as he'd left it. Crossword puzzle books stacked in order of difficulty. Coffee-stained coasters arranged in a neat row, because Henry was the kind of man who made messes methodically. His reading glasses, the backup pair, identical to the ones upstairs, folded precisely on top of a legal pad covered in numbers I'd never tried to understand. I'd always assumed the numbers were from his accounting work. Henry had been a CPA for 41 years at a mid-sized firm in Stamford. Not glamorous, not exciting, the kind of career that people described as steady when they meant boring. He drove a 12-year-old Honda. He bought his suits at J.C. Penney. He brought his lunch to work in the same brown bag every day for 4 decades. And when I suggested he might want a nicer lunchbox, he'd looked at me like I'd proposed we move to Mars. "The bag works fine, Joe," he'd said. Why fix what works? That was Henry's philosophy about everything. Why fix what works? Why spend what you don't need to spend? Why draw attention to yourself when invisibility is so much safer? I'd loved him for it. I'd also, if I'm honest, resented him for it. Just a little, just in the quiet corners of our marriage where resentment lives like dust in the spaces between furniture. I'd wanted sometimes to eat at the kind of restaurant where they pronounce water with a French accent, to wear a dress that cost more than groceries, to feel just once like a woman whose life had some sparkle to it. Henry had always smiled at those moments of wanting and said, "Someday, Joe, someday I'll explain." Someday never came. Henry's heart stopped at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon while he was making coffee in our kitchen, and he took his explanations with him into the ground at Evergreen Cemetery. Until now, the key fit a panel in the basement wall that I'd never noticed, a section of concrete that looked identical to every other section, except that when you pressed the left edge, it swung inward on hidden hinges to reveal a steel safe the size of a small refrigerator. Henry had been cleverer than he'd ever let on. 41 years of being underestimated had given him plenty of time to build hiding places. My hands were shaking as I turned the key. The safe opened with a soft click, like a lock that had been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. Inside, stacked with Henry's characteristic neatness, I found bank statements. Dozens of them. From institutions I'd never heard of. Not our local credit union, not the savings account we'd shared for 47 years, but investment banks, brokerage firms, names that belonged in the financial pages of newspapers I'd never read, investment records spanning decades, stock portfolios, municipal bonds, real estate trusts, each document bearing Henry's name and numbers that made my eyes swim, legal papers establishing trusts and protections I didn't know existed, an irrevocable trust, I didn't even know what that meant, with my name as the sole beneficiary, layers and layers of legal architecture, built over years with the quiet patience of a man constructing a cathedral one brick at a time. And at the very bottom, beneath all the numbers and legal language and financial machinery, a letter, a single envelope, white, my name on the front in Henry's handwriting, and beneath my name, 3 words, "Open this last." I sat down in Henry's old desk chair, the one that still smelled like him, the one that creaked in the same spot it had creaked for 20 years, and I opened the letter with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. My dearest Joanna, if you're reading this, two things have happened. I'm gone, and someone has come for you. I'm sorry I never told you about the money. I know that sounds absurd, and when you see the numbers, you might be angry with me for a while. That's okay. You've always been magnificent when you're angry, even if you never believed it. The total, as of my last calculation, is $33 million. I stopped reading. I read the number again. I read it a third time, certain that grief had finally broken something in my brain, and I was hallucinating dollar signs on a dead man's letter. $33 million. Henry Redford, the man who drove a 2009 Honda Civic, the man who reused aluminum foil, the man who argued with me about whether we really needed the premium cable package when the basic one had plenty of channels. $33 million. I know. I can hear you saying my name right now in that tone you use when I've done something inexplicable. Henry David Redford, what on earth? Here's the truth, Joe. I was never just an accountant. I was a very good accountant. Good enough to see patterns in the market that others missed. Good enough to invest quietly over 4 decades. Good enough to build something significant without anyone noticing. I lived modestly because modesty was my strategy. I hid our wealth because wealth attracts predators. And predators, Joe, they always come for widows first. The money is protected in an irrevocable trust. You control everything. No one else can access it. Not even if they gain power of attorney. Not even if they convince a judge you're incompetent. Not even if you sign whatever papers some charming young man is probably waving in front of you right now. Yes, I knew this would happen. I predicted it within 2 years of my death, probably through a family connection, probably someone young and handsome who would make our daughter feel safe while making you feel small. In the envelope with this letter, you'll find a business card for Meg Calloway. She's an attorney I've worked with for 15 years. She knows everything. She has instructions. She's been waiting for your call. Use every resource I've left you, Joe. Protect yourself. Protect our daughter, even if she doesn't understand why she needs protecting. And don't let anyone steal what I spent 40 years building for you. I turned the page. The back of the letter had one more paragraph, written in slightly shakier handwriting, as if Henry had added it later, perhaps near the end, when the heart that would eventually betray him was already beginning to falter. One more thing. The most important thing. You were never invisible to me, not for one single day in 47 years. Every morning I woke up next to you was a morning I knew exactly how lucky I was. I just never found the right words to say it often enough. So here are the words, Joe. Better late than never. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and anyone who mistakes your kindness for weakness deserves whatever's coming to them. All my love, across whatever distance. Henry, I don't know how long I sat in that basement chair. Long enough for the light from the small window to shift from morning white to afternoon gold. Long enough for my tears to dry on my face and dry again and dry a third time. Long enough to read the letter 4 times, each time finding something new. A phrase that sounded exactly like his voice. A comma placed with the same fussy precision he brought to everything. The way he wrote Joe instead of Joanna, because after 47 years he'd earned the shorthand. $33 million. But that number, enormous, incomprehensible, absurd, wasn't what broke me open. What broke me was 6 words written by a man who'd been dead for 2 years and still knew me better than anyone alive. You were never invisible to me. I pressed the letter against my chest like it was a living thing, like if I held it tight enough I could feel his heartbeat through the paper. Then I set it down. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and I picked up the business card tucked inside the envelope. Meg Calloway, Esquire. Calloway and Briggs, attorneys at law. Stamford, Connecticut. On the back, in Henry's handwriting, she's expecting you. Don't be polite. Be dangerous. I picked up my phone and dialed. It rang twice. Calloway and Briggs. This is Joanna Redford. I believe my husband Henry arranged for you to help me. A pause, then a voice. Female, mid-50s, sharp as a scalpel wrapped in velvet. Mrs. Redford, I've been waiting 2 years for this call. How soon can you come in? I looked at Henry's letter on the desk, at the numbers that would change everything, at the 6 words that already had. How about right now? 40 minutes later, I was sitting in an office that was nothing like what I'd expected. No dark mahogany, no leather-bound books gathering dust on intimidating shelves. Instead, clean lines, Large windows, family photos scattered among framed law degrees, and a ficus tree in the corner that looked healthier than most of the plants in my garden. Meg herself was maybe 55. Sharp-jawed, silver-streaked auburn hair pulled back with no-nonsense efficiency, and the kind of handshake that told you everything you needed to know about how she handled opposing counsel. "Sit down, Joanna. Can I call you Joanna?" "Henry did, so you've earned it by association." She smiled, a real smile, not a Cole Anders production, and spread documents across her desk with practiced hands. Trust papers, investment summaries, legal protections I couldn't have imagined existed. "Your husband was the most careful man I've ever worked with," she said. "He spent 15 years building this structure, every account, every trust provision, every legal safeguard, designed for one purpose: protecting me from someone like Cole. Protecting you from anyone. But yes, he specifically predicted the approach. Someone young, charming, connected through family, power of attorney paperwork within the first month." The accuracy of Henry's prediction made my skin prickle. He'd known this would happen the way a weatherman knows a storm is coming. Not the exact day, but the exact shape. "The trust is irrevocable," Meg continued. "That means even if you'd signed Cole's papers, every single page, he couldn't have touched a penny. The money exists in a structure that's legally untouchable by anyone except you." "Even with power of attorney?" "Even then. Henry designed it specifically to withstand that scenario. Your son-in-law could have waved those signed papers in front of every judge in Connecticut and gotten nowhere." I sat back, feeling the full weight of what Henry had built settling over me like armor I didn't know I was wearing. "So Cole can't hurt me financially. He can't touch you. But Joanna, that doesn't mean he's not dangerous." Meg opened a second folder, thinner, no legal letterhead, just printed pages and photographs. I took the liberty of doing some preliminary research when Henry first engaged me. He asked me to keep an eye on Tamsin's relationships. When Cole Anders appeared 18 months ago, I started paying closer attention. "What did you find?" "Enough to worry me, not enough to act on, which is why I'd like to bring in someone who can dig deeper." She slid a business card across the desk. "Ray Bowen, Private Investigations, Bridgeport, Connecticut." Beneath the name, in smaller type, "Retired Fairfield County PD, 28 years. "He's expensive," Meg said, "but with $33 million, I think we can manage his day rate." I almost laughed. Almost. "Do it." Ray Bowen was 61, built like a man who'd spent 3 decades opening doors that people didn't want opened, and had the kind of face that suggested he'd seen enough human behavior to be permanently unimpressed by it. He showed up at Meg's office 2 days later in a rumpled sport coat, carrying a coffee that was clearly his 4th of the morning. "Mrs. Redford, Meg tells me you've got a son-in-law problem." "I've got a son-in-law who brought a notary to steal my life. I'd call that more than a problem." He almost smiled. "Fair enough. Give me 2 weeks." It took him 11 days. The report arrived on a Wednesday, 47 pages, single-spaced, delivered to Meg's office in a plain manila envelope that contained enough information to dismantle Cole Anders' entire carefully constructed life. The 3 of us sat around Meg's conference table as Ray walked us through his findings with the flat, methodical tone of a man reading a grocery list. Cole Anders, 34, graduated from UConn, business degree, mediocre GPA, hired at Whitmore and Daily Financial in Stamford 6 years ago, fired 18 months ago for what the firm officially called procedural irregularities, meaning $87,000 in client funds went somewhere they shouldn't have gone. The firm chose to handle it internally rather than involve law enforcement. Bad press. Cole walked away clean on paper, dirty underneath. And since then? Since then, nothing legitimate. No employment, no filed taxes, but plenty of activity. Ray flipped pages. Gambling debts, online poker mostly, plus 3 trips to Atlantic City in the past year. Total outstanding, approximately $340,000. Owed to people who don't send reminder emails, if you take my meaning. I took his meaning. Cole wasn't just greedy. He was desperate. Desperate people do desperate things, and desperate things done to 72-year-old widows tend to end badly for the widow. "There's more," Ray said, and something in his voice shifted. Harder, quieter. The voice of a man about to deliver news he wished he didn't have. "Cole Anders didn't start with you." The room went still. Before Tamsin, he was involved with a woman named Ruth Paxton, 78 years old, widowed, lived alone in a nice house in Darien. He met her through a church volunteer program, presented himself as a helpful young man who wanted to assist elderly parishioners with household tasks. When was this? 3 years ago. The relationship lasted 8 months. During that time, Cole gained Ruth's trust, helped her with finances, and eventually convinced her to sign a durable power of attorney. I knew what was coming. I knew it the way you know the ending of a story that's already been written in someone else's suffering. How much did he take? $180,000. Cleaned out her savings, her retirement fund, and a small inheritance from her late sister. Ruth discovered the losses when her bank called about insufficient funds for her mortgage payment. Where is Ruth now? Ray paused. The pause told me everything. Shady Glen Assisted Living, Darien. Her children, a daughter in Hartford, a son in California, had to place her there when she couldn't maintain the house anymore. She can't afford in-home care. She can't afford much of anything. I stared at the photograph Ray placed on the table. A woman with white hair and kind eyes, standing in front of a modest colonial house with flower boxes in the windows. The kind of woman who bakes cookies for neighbors and remembers everyone's birthday. The kind of woman people describe as sweet right before they rob her blind. Ruth Paxton was what would have happened to me if Henry hadn't spent 40 years building a fortress I didn't know existed. The only difference between us was money. And money, I was learning, was the difference between independence and a room at Shady Glen. Ruth never pressed charges. She was too confused, too ashamed. By the time her daughter Linda figured out what had happened, Cole had disappeared into his next project. His next project being my daughter. Your daughter was the access point. You were the target. The room was silent. Meg was watching me with careful eyes. Ray was watching me with cop eyes, measuring, assessing, waiting to see which direction my reaction would take. I was looking at Ruth Paxton's photograph and feeling something rearrange itself permanently inside my chest. Is there anything else? I asked. Ray hesitated. I caught it, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers paused on the folder's edge. In 28 years of police work, Ray Bowen had learned how to deliver bad news. But some news is worse than bad. There's one more thing. About Tamsin. He placed a printed page on the table. Phone records, text messages, a highlighted exchange from 3 weeks before the wedding. Tamsin to Cole, September 14th, 9:47 p.m. Mom won't be difficult. She trusts me. Cole to Tamsin, September 14th, 9:52 p.m. Good. The paperwork needs to happen fast after the wedding, before she has time to think. Tamsin to Cole, September 14th, 10:01 p.m. I know. I already looked into it. Googled power of attorney for elderly parent. It's straightforward. I read the messages 3 times. Each time the words meant the same thing, but the pain found new places to settle. Behind my eyes, in the base of my throat, in the part of my chest where I kept every memory of Tamsin at 6 years old, reaching up for my hand in a parking lot, trusting me to keep her safe from cars and strangers and all the ordinary dangers of being small in a large world. Mom won't be difficult. 4 words. The most expensive words my daughter had ever spoken, though she didn't know it yet. Joanna. Meg's voice, careful and steady. This doesn't necessarily mean Tamsin understood what Cole was really planning. It's possible, likely even, that he framed this as genuine concern for your welfare, that Tamsin believed she was helping. She Googled it, Meg. 3 weeks before my daughter walked down the aisle, she was researching how to take legal control of her mother's life. That's not being manipulated. That's doing homework. Meg didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. What do you want to do? Ray asked. I looked at Ruth Paxton's photograph one last time. Sweet face, kind eyes, flower boxes. A woman who'd trusted the wrong person and lost everything. Her money, her house, her independence, her belief that she mattered enough to make her own decisions. Then I looked at the text messages from my daughter. Mom won't be difficult. 2 different kinds of betrayal. One from a stranger, one from my own blood. Both made possible by the same assumption, that I was too old, too quiet, too invisible to fight back. Henry's voice from a letter I'd already memorized. Don't let anyone steal what I spent 40 years building for you. I want to do two things, I said. First, I want to deal with Cole, permanently and legally. And second, and this is the harder thing, I want to sit across from my daughter and find out whether I lost her to Cole Anders, or whether I lost her long before he ever showed up. Meg nodded. Ray gathered his files, and I drove home through the Connecticut twilight, past the golden trees and white churches and tidy houses where, behind every door, someone was probably keeping a secret from someone they loved. Henry had kept $33 million from me. Tamsin had kept 4 words from me. And I had kept my grief so close and so quiet that my own daughter had mistaken my silence for surrender. We were a family of secrets. It was time to see what happened when every single one of them came out into the light. Meg and I spent the weekend planning. The approach had to be simple. No police hiding in closets, no wires taped to my chest, no theatrical traps from a television crime show. Just me, Cole, and the truth laid out on a kitchen table. Meg insisted on one precaution. She'd be parked down the street with her phone on, and if I didn't text her within an hour, she'd call the police. I agreed, not because I thought Cole was physically dangerous, but because Meg was the kind of woman who didn't take no for an answer, and I'd learned to pick my battles. I invited Cole to my house on a Wednesday evening. I told him I was ready to sign. He arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, punctual the way predators are punctual, because timing is everything when you're closing a trap. He carried his briefcase like a surgeon carries his instruments, and his smile was set to full wattage. The smile of a man who believed he'd already won. Joanna, thank you so much for reconsidering. I know this whole process can feel overwhelming. Oh, I'm not overwhelmed at all. I'm actually finding the whole experience quite educational. He settled into my living room like he already owned it, spreading documents across the coffee table Henry had built by hand in 1989, the one with the slightly uneven leg that Henry had never gotten around to fixing because it works fine. Joe, why fix what works? I brought everything, Cole said. Once we sign, you'll be completely protected. No more worrying about finances or legal matters or any of those complicated decisions. How reassuring. But before we discuss paperwork, I have a question about something unrelated. Of course, anything. I let 3 seconds of silence fill the kitchen. 3 seconds is nothing in ordinary conversation. In a room where someone is hiding something, 3 seconds is an eternity. Tell me about Ruth Paxton. 3 words, 3 syllables in the first, 2 in the second. The simplest sentence I'd spoken in weeks, and it landed like a glass of ice water thrown in his face. The change in Cole's face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Not dramatic. He was too practiced for drama. But the light behind his eyes went out, the way a television screen goes dark when you pull the plug. One moment, confident, charming, in control. The next, a man staring at a widow who had just become the most dangerous person he'd ever met. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Ruth Paxton, 78, Darien, Church Volunteer Program. You helped her with household tasks, gained her trust, convinced her to sign power of attorney, and withdrew $180,000 from her accounts over 8 months. She currently lives at Shady Glen Assisted Living because she can't afford the house you helped her lose. Each fact landed like a stone dropped onto glass. I watched the cracks spread across his composure in real time. Whoever told you that is lying. Private investigators rarely lie, Cole. It's bad for business. I opened the folder Ray had prepared. Bank records, withdrawal receipts, Ruth's signed POA with Cole's name on it, and spread them across the coffee table next to his own documents. They also take excellent photographs. Cole stared at the evidence. His jaw worked silently, the way a man's jaw works when every possible response is worse than the last. These don't prove anything. They prove everything. Your gambling debts, $340,000, mostly online poker in Atlantic City. Your termination from Whitmore and Daly for mishandling $87,000 in client funds. Your systematic approach to targeting elderly women who live alone. I paused. Let the silence do its work. And they prove that my daughter married a professional thief. Something broke in him then. Not his composure. That had been crumbling since I said Ruth's name. Something deeper. The architecture of his confidence, the scaffolding that held up the charming smile and the expensive suit and the practiced warmth. It all came down at once, and what was left underneath was smaller and more human than I'd expected. Cole sat down heavily, not in the chair he'd chosen, the dominant one, facing the room, but on the edge of the sofa, like a man whose legs had simply stopped cooperating. He put his face in his hands. "You don't understand," he said. His voice was different now, stripped, raw. "I owe people. People who don't send reminders, Mrs. Redford. They send visitors. I have until March." I looked at him, 34 years old, hands trembling, the mask completely gone, and I felt something I hadn't anticipated. Pity, not forgiveness, not sympathy. Pity, the specific unsentimental kind that comes from recognizing that the person in front of you is drowning and has chosen to drag others underwater instead of calling for help. I understood the desperation. I did not excuse what it had driven him to do. The pity lasted exactly as long as it took me to remember Ruth Paxton's photograph. Kind eyes, flower boxes, a woman eating institutional meals alone on holidays because the charming young man who'd promised to protect her had stolen her life instead. Then the pity was gone, and in its place, clarity. "Here's what's going to happen, Cole. You have 72 hours to do two things. First, you go to the police, and you confess to what you did to Ruth Paxton. All of it. The power of attorney, the withdrawals, everything. They'll arrest me. Yes, they will. I can't survive prison. The people I owe, they have connections inside. That's a problem you created, not one I'm obligated to solve. And the second thing? You tell Tamsin the truth. Everything. Not your version. Not the story you've crafted to make yourself the victim. The actual truth about who you are and what you've done." Cole lifted his face from his hands. His eyes were red. He looked in that moment not like a predator, but like a boy who'd been running from something for so long he'd forgotten what it was. "And if I don't? Then I send everything, the evidence, the bank records, Ruth's testimony, to the Fairfield County prosecutor. And I also make sure your creditors in Atlantic City know exactly where to find you." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard in my kitchen. Louder than Henry's last coffee cup falling to the floor. Louder than the phone call from the hospital. Louder than 2 years of grief echoing through empty rooms. Cole stood. He gathered his papers, the power of attorney, the financial oversight agreements, the documents designed to steal my independence, and put them back in his briefcase with the mechanical movements of a man whose body was moving while his mind was somewhere else entirely. At the front door, he turned back. "Your husband, he planned all of this? He planned for me to be able to protect myself. What I do with that protection is my choice. He must have loved you very much." The words hit me in a place I wasn't guarded, because they were true, and because they came from the mouth of a man who had never understood what love actually looked like until he was standing in the ruins of what it had built. "He did," I said. "That's why you never had a chance." Cole walked out into the November dark. I locked the door, turned off the porch light, then turned it back on, because some habits are stronger than anger, and sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't carry me to a chair. I'd held myself together for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of controlled devastation, of calculated calm, of being the dangerous woman Henry always said I was. Now, alone in my kitchen, I shook. My hands, my shoulders, my whole body trembling like a wire that had been held taut for too long and finally let go. I texted Meg. "It's done." Then I called her, because some things shouldn't be said in texts. "It's done," I said again. My voice didn't sound like mine. Now comes the hard part. The next 48 hours passed like a held breath. Cole confessed to the Darien police on a Friday morning, 53 hours after leaving my kitchen. I know because Meg called me at 11:14 a.m. with the details. Voluntary surrender, full statement, charges pending for financial exploitation of an elderly person. But he also did something I hadn't anticipated. He called Tamsin first, and he told her a version of the truth that was technically accurate and emotionally devastating, not because of what he confessed, but because of how he framed it. In Cole's telling, he was a desperate man driven to terrible choices by circumstances beyond his control, and the person who had destroyed his life, his marriage, his last chance at redemption, that person was me. Tamsin arrived at my door Saturday afternoon with red eyes and a fury that could strip paint from walls. "You had him investigated?" She didn't knock. She walked in like the house was hers, which in some emotional sense it always had been. You went through my private messages? You sat at my wedding and plotted against my husband? I let her scream. I owed her that much. I stood in my kitchen and let my daughter's anger fill every corner of the room, let it wash over the countertops and rattle the windows and echo off Henry's empty chair. She screamed for 3 full minutes and I didn't interrupt once, because rage needs space to breathe before it can become something more useful. When the screaming stopped, the silence was worse. I placed Ruth Paxton's file on the kitchen table, the photograph on top, kind eyes, flower boxes, a life dismantled by the same hands that had held my daughters at the altar. "This is Ruth Paxton," I said quietly. "She's 78 years old. She was a history teacher for 40 years. She lives in an assisted living facility in Darien because your husband stole everything she had. She eats alone. Her daughter Linda drives 2 hours every Sunday to visit and cries in the parking lot afterward." Tamsin stared at the photograph. "This is what Cole did before you. And this," I placed his power of attorney documents beside Ruth's file, "is what he planned to do to me." My daughter read the documents, slowly, page by page, her face cycling through emotions like weather, disbelief, confusion, recognition, and finally the terrible settled stillness of someone who has just understood something they can never ununderstand. When she looked up, her voice was the smallest I'd heard it since she was a child waking from a nightmare. "Did I help him do this to you?" The question I'd been dreading, the one without a comfortable answer. I could lie. I could say no, sweetheart. You didn't know. I could protect her from the truth the way I'd protected her from everything, from thunderstorms, from mean girls, from the knowledge that her father cried in the basement when she left for college. But Henry's letter was still warm in my memory. "Don't let anyone steal what I spent 40 years building for you." And what Henry built wasn't just money. It was a family that deserved the truth, even when the truth drew blood. "You didn't mean to," I said. "But yes, you made it easier for him to reach me. And that text message, 'Mom won't be difficult,' that's something I'll carry for a while." Tamsin's legs gave out the way mine had 2 nights before. She sank to the kitchen floor, the same tile I'd sat on shaking after Cole left, and she cried. Not the furious tears from minutes ago. These were the quiet, devastating kind. The kind that come when you realize you've been wrong about something fundamental, and the wrongness has cost someone you love. I sat down beside her, on the floor, 2 Redford women on cold kitchen tile, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and the lingering scent of Henry's Old Spice drifting up from the basement. Tamsin put her head on my shoulder. She hadn't done that since she was 6 years old, in a grocery store parking lot, scared of a thunderstorm. I didn't tell her everything was fine. It wasn't fine. I told her the only thing that mattered. "I'm still here, Tamsin, and I still love you. The rest, we figure out." Most people expected me to build an empire after that. Meg hinted at it. A foundation, a legal fund, a crusade against elder fraud that would put my name in newspapers and my face on television. Ray suggested I could help the FBI identify other predators running the same playbook as Cole. I considered it. For about 30 seconds. Then I thought about Ruth Paxton eating lunch alone at Shady Glen Assisted Living, and I realized that empires are built by people who've forgotten what the war was actually about. I drove to Darien on a Tuesday morning, 4 hours round trip, through the kind of Connecticut countryside that looks like it was designed by someone selling calendar photographs. White churches, stone walls, trees turning gold and crimson like the whole state was putting on a show. Shady Glen was nicer than I'd expected and sadder than I'd prepared for. Clean hallways, artificial flowers, the faint smell of disinfectant masked by lavender air freshener. A place designed to look like home while reminding you, in 1,000 small ways, that it wasn't. Ruth Paxton was sitting by a window in the common room, working a crossword puzzle with a pencil that needed sharpening. She was smaller than her photograph, thinner, more folded into herself, like a woman who'd spent 2 years trying to take up less space in a world that had already taken everything from her. "Mrs. Paxton, my name is Joanna Redford." She looked up. Her eyes were exactly as kind as they'd appeared in the photograph, but there was something behind them now. A wariness, a flinch, the specific caution of someone who'd learned too late that not everyone who smiles at you has your best interests at heart. "Do I know you?" "No, but we have something in common. A man named Cole Anders. The name hit her like a physical thing. She set down her pencil. Her hand trembled. I don't want to talk about him. I understand, but I need you to know something, Ruth. He tried to do the same thing to me, and he failed. Because my husband, a man very much like yours, I suspect, spent 40 years making sure I'd be protected. Ruth stared at me, not with suspicion, with something worse. The bewildered grief of someone who'd stopped believing that strangers could bring anything other than trouble. Why are you here? Because the only difference between you and me is that my husband hid money I didn't know about. That's it. Not courage, not intelligence, money. And money is something I can share. I told her what I intended to do. Hire a lawyer to recover what Cole had stolen. Pay off the debts he'd left behind. Get her house back. Get her home. Ruth listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that undid me completely. I thought nobody remembered I existed. I reached across the table and held her hand, papery, warm, trembling, and I thought, I know exactly how that feels. It took Meg 3 months to untangle what Cole had done to Ruth's finances. 3 months of legal filings, bank negotiations, and the kind of meticulous forensic accounting that Henry would have appreciated. Total cost, $187,000 in legal fees, settlements, and back payments on Ruth's mortgage. A fraction of what Henry had left me. An enormous sum for a woman who'd been told she had nothing left. The day Ruth moved back into her house, I drove to Darien to watch. Her daughter Linda, 52, a high school teacher with her mother's kind eyes and a backbone forged by 2 years of helpless fury, met me in the driveway. I don't understand why you did this, Linda said. You don't owe us anything. Your mother and I belong to the same club, I said. The club of women that charming men decided were invisible. I just happened to have a membership that came with better benefits. Ruth walked through her front door and touched the wall, just stood there in her own hallway, palm flat against the plaster, like she was making sure the house was real, that it hadn't disappeared during the 2 years she'd been gone. Then she turned to me, standing in her doorway with October light falling across her face, and smiled. Not a big smile, not a triumphant smile. The small, private smile of a woman who had just remembered that she was a person who lived in a house and owned a door and could decide for herself when to open it and when to close it. That smile was worth more than anything the legal system would do to Cole Anders, and I carry it with me still. Cole's trial was in January. Brief, efficient, without spectacle. He pled guilty to 1 count of financial exploitation of an elderly person, the Ruth Paxton case. His lawyer negotiated. The prosecution pushed. I was asked to deliver a victim impact statement on Ruth's behalf. She was too frail to travel to the courthouse, so I stood at the podium in her place, wearing the navy suit I'd bought for the occasion and Henry's broken Timex that still read 347. Cole sat 15 feet away. Prison clothes. Thinner. Older. The 4 smiles were gone, replaced by a single expression I hadn't seen before. The blank, exhausted face of a man who'd run out of performances. I'd written a long statement. 3 pages about justice, about consequences, about the systematic destruction of elderly people's independence. Meg had helped me edit it. It was precise, devastating, and legally airtight. I set it aside and spoke from memory instead. Your Honor, I didn't come here to destroy this man. I came here to tell you what happens when we decide that elderly people are already gone before they've actually left. I told them about Ruth. Not the legal Ruth, the bank statements and forged documents and stolen funds. The real Ruth. The woman who taught high school history for 40 years, who remembered every student's name, who kept flower boxes on her windows because she believed even a house should have something beautiful to offer the world. Cole Anders didn't just steal Ruth Paxton's money, I said. He stole her belief that she mattered enough to make her own decisions. That's not fraud. That's erasure. And erasure is what happens when we look at a woman over 70 and see furniture instead of a person. I looked at Cole. He looked back. And for one moment, brief, complicated, human, I saw something in his face that might have been shame. Real shame. Not the performed kind. The kind that arrives too late to prevent the damage, but early enough to make the ruins hurt. I'm not asking for the maximum sentence, I said. I'm asking for enough time for this man to understand that the people he treated as invisible, we see each other. and we remember. Cole was sentenced to 7 years. He'd be 41 when he got out, old enough to start over, young enough to choose differently. Whether he would, that wasn't my problem to solve. Tamsin comes for breakfast every Sunday now. She moved into an apartment on Maple Street after the divorce was finalized in March. Quiet, clean, no contested assets because everything Cole owned had been built on borrowed money and stolen time. The apartment is 12 minutes from my house. I know because I've driven the route enough times to have it memorized, though I'd never tell her that. Some kinds of watching over your children are best done quietly. We don't talk about Cole anymore. We talk about small things. Her new job at a nonprofit downtown. My garden. The roses are coming back after 2 years of neglect, as if they'd been waiting for permission. Whether Martha Henderson's banana bread recipe needs more cinnamon, or whether that's heresy. We are careful with each other in a way we never were before, and that carefulness is its own kind of love. Not the easy kind, but the kind you earn by breaking something and choosing to mend it instead of throwing it away. Sometimes mid-conversation, Tamsin stops and says, "Mom, I'm sorry about table 12. And I say, "Sweetheart, I've sat at worse tables. I always find my way back." We're not healed. Healing suggests a return to something that existed before, and what existed before wasn't healthy. It was just quiet. What we're building now is messier, more honest. The kind of relationship where someone can say I hurt you, and the other person can say yes, you did, and they both stay at the table anyway. Ruth Paxton and I talk every Thursday evening. We don't discuss Cole or money or legal proceedings. We talk about our husbands. Hers was named Walter, mine was Henry, and both of them had the same maddening habit of leaving their reading glasses in impossible places. Ruth calls me my dragon. I call her my flower box. Nobody else would understand. That's the point. Tonight, I'm sitting in my kitchen. Henry's chair is across from me, empty, the way it's been for over 2 years now. His crossword book, his reading glasses, his coffee mug that I still wash every Sunday. Not because I'm pretending he's coming back, but because some rituals are how we hold the people we've lost close enough to feel. I take his letter from the shelf where I keep it now, not hidden in a basement, but in plain sight, next to the photograph from our wedding day, 1977, 2 kids who had no idea what they were getting into. I don't need to read it anymore. I've memorized every word. But I unfold it anyway, because the paper still holds the shape of his hands. I pour a glass of wine. Not the cheap widow's wine from the refrigerator. The good bottle. The one Henry had been saving in the basement for a special occasion that never seemed to arrive. This is the occasion, Henry. This is it. I raise my glass toward the empty chair. Here's to you, Henry Redford. You spent 40 years making sure I'd never be invisible. It took me 2 years to understand that the money was never the gift. I drink. I set the glass down. I fold the letter and put it back on the shelf. You were. The kitchen is quiet. The porch light is on. Henry's light, my constant. Somewhere in a facility in upstate New York, Cole Anders is learning that some mistakes follow you through walls. Somewhere in Darien, Ruth Paxton is sleeping in her own bed in her own house with flower boxes on her windows. Somewhere on Maple Street, my daughter is becoming the kind of woman who asks hard questions and stays for the answers. Not because I saved her, but because I trusted her with the truth. And here, on Birch Lane, a 72-year-old widow is sitting in her kitchen, drinking good wine, wearing a broken watch, and learning something that took her an entire lifetime to understand. You are never invisible to the people who love you, not even after they're gone, especially not after they're gone. Some widows sit quietly behind the flowers, and some of us are the flowers, patient, beautiful, and hiding thorns that draw blood. Thanks for listening. If this story found you at a time when you needed it, I'm glad. And if you know a woman who's been made to feel invisible, share it with her. Remind her she has teeth. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.